$4, a deed, and 4 words, don't dig too deep. On a white Wyoming wash, a worn peso becomes a map. A black coat rider smells blood, and ice tears like silk. Gold flashes, guns talk. A father chooses the veins shine or a warm roof that keeps a child alive. The north wind worried the shingles of the Buffalo land office until they clicked like loose teeth. A brown leak ran down the plaster over the deed clerk's head, and the whole room smelled of sour ink and wet wool. Eli Carter stood with his hat in his hands and the last of his silver on the scarred counter. $4 turned palm warm from being held too long. Lyle Crow pinched the coins like they might squeal and slid a thin deed across. His pen scratched slow, then faster, as if hurrying might keep the roof from dropping on him. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Wash Edge tract, he said, not meeting Eli's eyes. Winter ground's better than no ground. Eli glanced at Willa. The girl's cheeks were raw from Mace wind, her braid stiff with frost, one mitten patched with twine. Dusty lay by her boots, ribs showing under a shag of winter coat, amber eyes following every move. Eli set the pen to paper and wrote his name steady. Any patch with water will carry us through, he said. Against the back wall hung a fly-specked survey map. Lamplight skated across penciled notes. Someone had added thin, milky streaks curling along a low ridge above the wash. Willa drifted toward it, as if drawn by a thread. "Papa," she whispered, "that line's like a white river in the rocks." "Milky quartz," offered the old woman by the stove. Ma Hargrove, folks called her, whether she liked it or not. She warmed her hands over a stingy coal fire and watched everything. Veins don't show themselves for free. Eli felt the room lean colder. By the door, a sun-faded broadsheet flapped where the wind snuck under the sill. U.S. Marshal requests information on Orrin Pike, assayer, Red Butte, missing. The paper's edges were roped with thumbtack rust. Names had a way of sticking to a man like burrs. Missing was one of them. Crow stamped the deed, hands trembling so the seal smudged. "There," he said, too bright. "All yours." He slid the paper across, then a breath later slid a torn scrap after it, face down. Eli lifted it with 2 fingers. 4 words crawled in a flea-bite hand. "Don't dig too deep." Crow lifted his shoulders without lifting his eyes. "Ground's froze shallow." "Spade'll skate. Best wait till sun breaks. Gonna be a mean stretch afore that," Ma said. Her voice had the burr of a whetstone. "Land that cheap carries a fever, son. You watch for the shivers." Eli folded the deed and the scrap together, tucking both inside his coat where the lining had worn smooth. He'd known men whose luck came wrapped in warnings. Most of them read the warning part too late. He tipped his hat to Ma. "Much obliged." Willa tugged his sleeve. "Can we keep the pencil?" She pointed to the nub beside the map, chewed down to a thumb's length. "I want to mark the little circles, so I don't forget where they were." Crow hesitated, then nodded. Map's old. Lines wander outside. The wind hit them square, sharp as a file. The boardwalk was slick with blown ice. Their wagon waited in the lee of the livery, mules steaming, harness bells giving a tired jingle. Eli boosted Willa up, then the dog, then climbed after, the springs creaking like a man's knees in bad weather. He set the deed under the seat where he could feel its weight without seeing it. They rolled past the post where the marshal's notice hung. Dust lifted and fell off the paper as the door slammed behind someone, and for a blink it seemed the word "missing" was the only black left on the page. Willa held the pencil tight in her mitten. "Milky quartz," she tried the words, tasting them. "It looks like the sky got trapped in the hill." "Sky don't keep you warm neither," Eli said, but his voice came soft. He looked out toward the gray rise where the wash cut a hard line through the country. A vein, a wash, a winter to get through. You could set a whole season by 3 such things. They turned the wagon's nose toward the country Lyle Crow had sold, and the wind tried to push them back. Dusty braced his paws and stared into it, ears slivered to the gale. Eli hunched deeper in his coat and laid the reins gentle. Somewhere under that lean ground there might be water. The rest, penciled streaks, missing assayers, scraps that whispered, "Don't dig," he folded small and set behind his ribs with the deed. The mule leaned into the traces. The north took a bigger bite, and the wagon rattled toward the wash. The country Lyle had sold them ran out where the wash braided through scrub and winter killed grass. Snow lay thin as ash. Wind had combed it into low ripples that caught on sage and broke there. The mule's breath plumed and blew away. Eli kept the wagon off the ice-scabbed flats and followed a spine of higher ground until the cairn showed waist-high stacks of weathered rock, set careful, not the way a flood leaves things. Willa saw them first. "Somebody put those up one by one," she said. "Not a storm." "Storms don't count," Eli said. He pulled the wagon short of the first stack. The stones were notched with old frost scars, and he leaned in, laced with threads of white through the darker rock. Milky quartz, like Ma had said. He broke a flake off with a thumbnail and smelled the chip. Damp metal, faint and sour, like a match you'd just blown out. Dusty made a low sound deep in his chest and picked his way ahead, tail down, nose working. He zigzagged from cairn to cairn, then off to the left, where the wash through a shallow curve. Willa slid down and shadowed him, small boots squeaking on crusted snow. Eli followed with the shovel, the haft cold enough to bite his palm through the glove. On the bend lay a patch of ground that didn't match the rest. Snow thinned there as if it never quite took, and when the wind laid off you could hear a skin of ice crisp underfoot. Willa stopped. "Here," she said, not loud. She stamped once with her heel. The sound came back wrong, hollow and close, like the belly of an empty drum. Eli traded looks with her and eased the shovel into the crust. The top layer shattered like sugar glass. He skimmed it away and drove the blade into the earth beneath. The ground should have been iron hard this late in winter. Instead, it gave a little, dark and damp. He pried up a slab of sod and smelled it. Wet metal, a ghost of sulfur, the clean rot of cold soil. "Feel this," Willa said. She was on her knees, mitten off, fingers splayed in the dirt where he'd lifted. "There's grit in it that isn't sand." He pinched a pinch between thumb and forefinger. The grains caught on his skin like flour, with grit in it. When he looked close, he saw tiny, bright edges, and in the side, cut the faintest seam of white, no whiter than a bootlace. Quartz thread running north and vanishing under darker clay. Dusty circled the patch, bayonet tail stiff now, a head low. He pawed once and whined, then backed off, uneasy with the hollow. Eli set his boot and drove the shovel again, deeper. The blade struck something firm and skated, not stone, smoother. He shaved around it, careful, feeling for shape through the wood and iron like a blind man feels a face. A charred stick lay buried just off the edge, black to the core, the top whittled square long ago. Someone had set a marker here and burned it down to hide the work. That put a weight in Eli's chest he didn't like. He scraped more slow circles, letting the wind dry the wet earth in rinds around the hole. The patch widened into a clean rectangle, a little longer than a man, 6 by 3 if he had to guess. Willa leaned close, breath fogging. "Do you hear it?" She tapped the ground with her knuckles. The sound drummed and died. She put her ear down like listening for a rail. "There's something under." "Back a pace," Eli said, gentler than it sounded familiar. He slid the shovel's edge down along the rectangle's corner and levered. The soil broke away in sheets. Beneath it lay a plain of dark metal, not rust red, but the dull, oiled color of old iron kept from air. His pulse kicked. He worked faster without looking like he did, clearing the corner, then another, letting the trench define its own square. Dusty's hackles rose. He faced upslope and went quiet. The kind of quiet that means he's decided not to bark because barking would waste breath. Eli didn't look where the dog looked, not yet. The shovel found the side again and skated a hand's width before catching at a seam. Easy, he told the ground, or himself. He set the shovel at a new angle and pressed. The steel lip slipped, bit, and then the whole world answered with one deep, thick clack, the voice of heavy metal under frozen earth. Eli levered a corner with the shovel and felt the ground answer with a heavy breath, like he'd woken something sleeping under there. The metal didn't move so much as let him know it was there. He scraped at the seam until his knuckles stung from cold through the glove. Willa crouched close, her braid brushing the edge of the hole. Dusty stayed upslope, ears cut to knives, staring into weather. Hoofbeats came ragged at first, then steadied, the sound of a horse that knew where it was putting its feet. Eli rose slow. A rider slid along the spine of rock like shadow traveling a ridgeline. Black horse, black wool coat crusted with ice, hat brim low against the wind. He drew up just shy of the cairn and sat quiet a second, letting the horse blow. Afternoon. His voice was a gravel road. He kept one hand loose on the reins, the other resting easy where a man's pistol lives. That ground yours? Eli put a shoulder between the rider and the hole. Paper says it is. Papers say a lot. The man's mouth made the shape of a smile without getting there. He nudged the horse one step and let his eyes work the rectangle. Name's Kincaid. Silas. I ain't here to rob, just to square a ledger. Your hand's resting wrong for bookkeeping, Eli said. Kincaid looked down at his own glove on the walnut grip and drifted it away, palm up, show empty, then set it on the saddle horn. He had the look of a man used to leaning on things that shot back. Thin scar climbing one cheek, eyes the color of watered coffee gone cold. Orrin Pike put up these rocks, he said, nodding at the cairn. A sayer out of Red Butte. He was particular. Liked rings and marks and numbers that lined neat. Folks brought him rocked away, and he kept a book about what came and where. He's gone now, ledger with him. Willa stood small and straight. Gone where? If I knew that, I'd be somewhere else this minute. Kincaid glanced at the wash. Pike liked milky quartz. Said it ran like a rib under this country. His eyes cut back to the clean-edged rectangle. He also knew how to make a thing hard to find. Eli felt the weight of the shovel again, the ache in his wrists. He didn't like having a stranger's words in his hole. You know a lot about a man you ain't with, he said. Deputy once, Kincaid answered, as if it were a weather note. Enough years around ore and liars to smell both. Word got to me Pike went missing, and so did certain shipments that ought to have been in other hands. That kind of arithmetic don't stay quiet long. He studied Eli. You come by this ground honest? Paid for it with the last I had, Eli said. That's honest enough. Wind sawed at them. Dusty gave a low woof, but didn't turn loose of whatever he'd fixed on. Kincaid eased his horse a half the step to give the dog his space. Then we'll treat each other square long as square. Runs, he said. What you got under there is heavy. You ain't moving it by yourself. I ain't bent a help. Didn't offer it. He shifted his gaze to Willa. You the one sees lines in rock? Willa frowned like she wasn't sure if that was a compliment. She looked down at her mittens, then at the cairn by Kincaid's knee. Snow had scoured one side clean, leaving a shelf of old gravel at the base. Something glinted there, the wrong color for winter. She stepped careful, pinched the thing out of the ice crust, and rubbed it on her sleeve. Papa. She held it up between thumb and finger, a coin worn thin at the edges. silver gone soft with years, dark in the low places. Not an American dollar. The face was a sunburst and a halo of letters she didn't know. Around the rim someone had cut tiny ticks with a knife, some thin, some thick. Near the sun's mouth, a little wolf's head had been scratched crude, ears pointy, jaw open. Kincaid's body made a small, involuntary lean. He stopped it halfway and made himself still. "Well, I'll be damned," he said without heat. "Peso." Pike favored them for rubbing. "Soft silver takes a mark clean." "What's the marks mean?" Willa asked. "Depends who put 'em there." Kincaid didn't take his eyes off the coin. Pike liked to walk from what he could see. Rock piles, lone trees. He counted a body by his boots. Thin tick for 5, thick for 10. He was fussy about grade. His gaze slid to the slope. Up counts different than down. Eli didn't move for the coin. He watched Kincaid watching his girl. "You speak like a man quoting scripture." "Just an old ledger," Kincaid said, "gone missing." He finally looked back at Eli. "I ain't here to take your whole. I am here to keep certain men from taking both your whole and your high. They'll be along. Maybe not this hour. Wind throws sound strange. But they'll come. Who? Men who think Pike owed them. Men who think the rib of this country belongs to their pocket." He drew a sleeve across his mouth and let breath fog the wool. "If you plan to dig, dig quiet. If you plan to run, run before the ice softens." Willa turned the coin in her palm so the wolf looked at the cairn. "There's little dots, too," she said, almost to herself. "Like seeds. And the ticks ain't all the same." Kincaid nodded once, the way a far rider might nod to a fence post that had stood longer than men. He compensated for slope. 5 uphill to Kissett Square. His mouth made that not smile again. "Clever old coot." Dusty's ears tipped and he gave a small, strangled bark. He didn't finish. Eli felt the air change, the way it does when a hawk's shadow slides over ground. He took the coin from Willa's hand and weighed it, thumb finding each tiny cut. The wolf head stared back crude and sure. "Papa?" Willa's voice had gone thin. "Do we count?" Eli looked at the rectangle, at the cairn, at the man on the black horse who said ledger like it was a sin and a promise. He closed Willa's hand back over the peso. "We count," he said, "but we count careful." Kincaid eased his horse sideways to make room without making threat. The wind fell for a blink, and in that pocket of quiet Eli could hear something far up the wash. That wasn't weather, faint, regular, like someone slapping a wet rope on a rail. Hooves, a lot of them, taking their time. Willa's mittens creaked as she squeezed the coin. The wolf's head lay cold against her palm. Dusty put his nose to the snow and pointed his whole body at the cairn, tail straight as a switch. Beneath his paws the ice gave a little, and a thin buried sparkle winked where the snow had scoured back, another sliver of milky quartz running the same direction as the wolf's gaze. Willa held the peso like a compass. The wolf's mouth pointed at the nearest cairn, flat-topped, a little taller than Eli's belt. Around the coin's edge the knife cuts ran in a stutter, thin, thin, thick, thin, then a pinprick dot punched close to the rim. "Read it," Eli said. "Thin's 5, thick's 10, Willa answered, breath pluming. 4 thins and a thick makes 30, and the dot means 5 uphill to correct." "Grade compensation," Kincaid said, quiet. He'd turned his horse a hair to put the wind in its tail and his eyes on the wash. Pike hated losing count to slope. Eli nodded once. "All right." From the wolf cairn, he set his heel at the cairn's base and started off down the grade, counting, boots crunching in the crust. 1 5 10 Willa caught his sleeve. "Uphill, Papa." Dot says uphill. She pointed. The slope fell toward the wash. The ground rose toward a line of scrub cedar and a shallow saddle beyond. If we go down, we overshoot. Kincaid made a small, approving noise. Eli swallowed what pride he had spare and turned into the steep. 5 paces, 10, 15, the wind came sideways and tried to lean him back where he'd started. 20, 25, 30. He stopped where the grade eased, just a whisper, and looked around at what to any other eye was the same color of winter, dead long as you could see. Willa went to her knees without being told. She laid the coin on the snow, wolf mouth still facing the cairn, and counted 5 more paces uphill. Small boots careful, the pencil nub clenched in her mitten. "Here," she said, planting the pencil like a flag. Dusty had already been circling that way, nose low, tail its short, steady metronome. He pawed once, then twice, and gave a single whine that hung white in the air. Eli scraped the crust with the shovel's edge. The top skin shattered and skittered. Beneath lay ground soft as a thawed loaf. He cut a square and flipped it. Steam feathered off the black dirt and carried that wet metal scent again, touched now with a deeper sulfur ghost. Like struck matches left in a damp drawer, he ran the blade in shallow. He learned the feel of the buried metal's skin and wanted no wild gouges. "Slow," Kincaid said. "Not an order, a reminder." Eli slowed. He shaved, he lifted, he listened to the feedback in the wood and iron. The first kiss of steel on something harder came bright and sharp. He widened the cut. The corner resolved, not the big coffin-long box from the lower patch, but a smaller chest, edges truer, iron straps less corroded, the metal dark with age, but not eaten. He cleared around the lip and brushed with his glove until the hinge flange showed. A stubby tongue of iron set like a molar in the lid. "Latch?" he asked. "Sideways," Kincaid said. Pike didn't trust front snaps. Eli found the side way to catch. With his fingers worked cold, stiff leather under it and lifted. The lid hung a second, then surrendered with a wet sigh where soil had glued it down. A smell breathed out. Old grease, old stone, the flat sweetness of coins. Willa and Dusty leaned together. Eli lifted the lid the rest of the way. They didn't say anything because talking would have been the wrong kind of noise. Light filled the box and threw itself back. Gold coins, edge to edge, stacked in a lazy soldier's order, some bright, some dulled to honey. Under the top layer ran a skin of vein ore, white quartz knit with hairline threads the color of straw in sunlight. And in the quartz were flecks like cat eyes, pyrite, shining fool-proud among the real. The gold sat on the quartz like grain on a threshing floor. In the far back corner, wrapped in oiled cloth, something dense pressed the fabric flat. Eli didn't touch it. Willa's breath hitched. Her mitten hovered over the coins without landing. "They look warm," she said, which was what gold always looks like if you're 9 and freezing. "They ain't," Eli said, but his voice had gone low. Kincaid swung down from the saddle, boots whispering in the snow, and stood with his hands where Eli could see them. He didn't step closer than need demanded. His face went empty the way men do when they're keeping themselves from wanting. "Pike salted his own caches with ore," he said. "That's his way of telling himself the vein's real and not just luck. Assayers are like that. They trust scales and rock before they trust men." Eli slid his glove under a single coin and lifted it. It lay heavy and honest. He let it clink back on its brothers, a small, thick sound. Under the coins his glove brushed the quartz. It was cold as bone. He could feel the tiny ridges where gold and quartz met and disagreed. He set the lid against his knee and looked over the spread. Enough for salt, flour, new shoes for the mule, a coil of wire, and more, enough to bend a man toward wrong if he forgot winter ends. Dusty's ears flicked forward. He left the chest and trotted 3 paces, stopped nose high, then swung left and right like a pointer, worrying a scent the wind kept teasing away. Willa followed the dog's line with her eyes and then, without looking at Eli, turned the peso in her palm so the wolf's mouth faced a different cairn farther up the rib. "There'll be more," she said, not greedy, certain. "The coin's not the place. It's the key to places." Eli eased the lid back down and spread a blot of loose dirt over the seam. Just a smear, just enough to smudge the shine. He looked toward the wash. The wind was dragging a gray veil along it, and behind the veil dark flecks moved with a timing horses use when men ride them long, black sash, outfit, or men shaped like them. The distance soaked their sound until it was only a tremor in the ice. Kincaid followed his look. His jaw worked once, then stilled. "You take what you can carry in a hurry," he said, quiet. "Leave the rest under Pike's hand. We won't be the first to count this wrong if we stand here admiring it." Willa tore her eyes from the chest and tucked the peso under her coat, close to her skin. Eli slid 5 coins into his pocket, enough to trade for feed, for beans, for a short stack of stove wood. He hesitated, then took 5 more and handed them to Willa to hold. "For shoes," he said, "yours first." She nodded like it was a vow. Dusty bumped her knee, impatient with human slowness. "Wolf cairn's the start," Kincaid said. "Pike walked the line of quartz and hung sign where the country would remember for him. Thin ticks, thick ticks, dots for grade. That ledger in his head's the only book that matters now." Eli pressed his palm to the closed lid once, as if thanking the dead man whose habits had brought them here, then scuffed snow over the disturbed patch until the box looked like a shadow among shadows. He gathered the shovel, shouldered it, and put himself between Willa and the wash while they moved. The wind freshened and made the cairns whisper among themselves. Down rib, the flecks on the gray veil sharpened into shapes, men wearing dark scarves at their throats and over their noses, to keep the cold out and their names in. "Time to be small," Eli said. "Time to be scarce," Kincaid agreed. He swung into the saddle in one smooth lift, like a man who did not intend to stiffen from his wound until later. "Count quick, count right, and when I say run, you ain't too proud to run." "We ain't," Eli said. They stepped back from Pike's little fortune and turned their faces uphill, where the dot told them to go, the piezo logic beating steady in Willa's pocket, like a second heart. Behind them, the wash gave a low, traveling moan as the wind shoved at the ice. Ahead, the ridge carried a pale seam of quartz, hidden in winter grass, a thin promise stitched into a hard country. And out on the gray, the sash came on, patient as debt. They climbed into the weather, counting by Willa's pocketed peso and by the stubborn beat of their own hearts. The ridge kept its quartz seam mostly hid, a pale thread lost in frost-burnt grass. Behind them the wash moaned and the wind combed the country flat, as if it meant to wipe tracks and names both. A man stepped out of a ragged stand of juniper as neat as if he'd grown there. He wore a coat patched with 4 different lives and a hat that looked older than his knees. One leg dragged a touch, a beard like winter moss. He kept both hands away from everything. "Don't shoot less you hate surprises," he said, voice friendly in a way that could go either way. "Name's McCready. Patches'll do. I've been watching you count." Kincaid didn't point his gun. He didn't put it away either. "You've been watching the wrong folks most of your life, by the look." Patches grinned with 3 good teeth and 1 gold that wasn't. "Seen men die for less glitter," he said, as if reciting a marriage vow. "Also seen men live longer by not being hogs at the trough." "You'd be them second kind?" "Trying," Eli said. Patches cocked his head, listening past them. Far off, the wind braided with a sound like dry leather slapped on a rail. "Riders," he nodded to himself. Black sashes in the neighborhood. I smelt their tobacco this morning. They're riding off take so as to drift around and catch your wind. You ain't got an hour. Kincaid's jaw worked. You know 'em." "Know their horses," Patches said. "Men come and go. Smell stays. Anyhow, there's a byway under the windbreak yonder. Snow lays different there, leads toward Ma Hargrove's, without showing your belly to the wash. Stove's honest, woman's mean. That's why she's still alive." He peered at Willa. "You the counter?" Willa nodded, suspicious, small chin set. Dusty stood on her toe to keep her from moving much. Patches eased a hand into his coat slow and came out with nothing but a pinch of tobacco, which he tucked behind his lip without lighting. "Ledger says you don't need more than a winter's worth," he said. "After that, the trouble costs double." Kincaid let out a breath he'd been balling up tight. "Ledger," he said, tasting the word like an old bruise. "You talk about it like a priest." "Priest don't keep you out of jail," Patches said. "Ledger might. Pinkerton's been sniffing every time some buckaroo tries to sell dust without a book to pin it on. They'll string your days out with questions till your spring's gone. Ask me how I know." Eli scraped his glove on his coat and looked at Kincaid. "You were a deputy." "Was," Kincaid said. He watched the ridge like it was speaking. "Then I wasn't." "Took work I shouldn't have taken, with men I should have shot first time I met 'em. Sash paid for a fixer, someone to clean sign, lose a cart, nudge a witness. I carried that dirt in my boots for too long." He touched the edge of his coat where a tin badge used to live. "I'm of a mind to square it if the Lord leaves me the breath." Patches nodded as if a man had finally told a joke he liked. "Well, ain't that something? World's mostly folks picking between wrong and hungry. You've got a kid with you, Carter." "That's a different Ledger." Eli looked at Willa. Her mittens were damp through, hair crisp with frost at the tips. She smelled like wool and cold. His chest tightened. "We take what carries us through." "That's all," he said, more to himself than to them. "Then hear a plan," Kincaid said, quiet and quick. Willa and the dog worked the small caches, peso logic thin to thick, dots uphill, just enough to fill a wagon that won't break an axle. "You and me ghost the trail," Patches says, "straight for Ma's stove. I'll fall back and braid the sash into them rocks down by the wolf cairn. They'll see sign and chase what they think is all you've got. You keep moving. You don't look back unless Shot tells you to." "And if Shot tells us to?" Eli asked. "Then you move faster." Kincaid's mouth made a crooked line that might have been humor on a better day. "I ain't promising heroics. I'm promising time." "There's a difference." Patches spat a brown thought into the snow and wiped his lip with the back of his hand. "I'll lay you a slide trap on the ice shelf," he said. "2 steps wrong and their ponies will do the arithmetic for 'em. Don't kill a man, might kill his nerve. Works about the same if you ain't writing scripture." Willa was already fishing the peso from her coat. The wolf's muzzle gleamed where her warmth had polished it. "Thin, thin, thick, thick," she read. "Dot, that's 30 and up 5 from the cedar stump with the twist." She pointed. The dog pointed too, nose like a finger. "There," she said, sure as noon. Eli put his hand on Kincaid's sleeve. "Wool, wet and rough. You don't owe us nothing." Kincaid met his eye. Something naked moved there and then sat down, tired. "I owe that Ledger," he said, "and I owe a girl in another winter I didn't get to keep. Don't stand here arguing me out of square." Eli didn't. He took his hand back and squeezed Willa's shoulder. "Count it right. Then we go." They moved fast without looking like running. Dusty stitched the ground ahead, hauling them by his nose. Willa counted under her breath, boots neat, flagging markers with the pencil nub, the weight of coin in hand, her mitten like a hot stone that wasn't. Eli cut only the tops of boxes, took small honest handfuls, a scatter of coins too, cloth-wrapped lumps that might be bars or wishes, and pushed lids back under dirt as if putting a child to sleep. Kincaid rode a slow arc below them, making himself seen in little flashes where a man with a spyglass might mark him and make plans. The wind swung, and the country changed color. Down by the wolf cairn, a horse screamed, a sharp riven sound like the first tear in canvas. Men shouted with their mouths wrapped, and you couldn't hear the words. Eli felt it in his bones anyway. Patch's laugh came thin and old as he slid into the juniper to go set his wicked patient trap. Kincaid lifted his hand without looking back. It cut the air flat. Go. And then he was already drifting down toward the cairn like a piece of night that meant to snag on somebody and not let go. Willa clutched the peso. Dusty pulled against the air, and Eli shouldered the last of what he dared to carry. "Time's up," he said. "Time to be scarce," Willa answered, her voice small and steady. They turned toward the windbreak Patches had promised, a seam in the country that hid travelers who walked light. Behind them, down by the cairn, stacked stones and the coffin-long patch they'd left covered to upas. The black sash outfit found fresh ground and fresh reason, and the country drew a hard breath before it yelled. The country shut like a fist. Wind came down the rib and turned to chalk, gritting their teeth, blinding the mule, smearing cairn and scrub into one moving wall. A whiteout doesn't howl, it hisses, steady as a snake too patient to strike. Eli hunched the wagon under the windbreak Patches had promised, a low seam of cedar and bent willow, and lifted Willa down into it. Dusty flattened himself, ears razored to nothing. Far off, 2 shots dragged slow across the storm, Kincaid warning, not wasteful. Then a third, closer, that sounded like a nail being set true. Patches ghosted ahead, a rag of man in a raggeder coat, scraping with a hacksaw and a broken shovel where the wash fell off to a shelf of river ice. "2 steps wrong," he muttered to the storm, "and them ponies'll do the arithmetic." "Count it," Eli told Willa, pressing the peso back into her mitten. "Fast and right." She nodded, eyes narrowed to slits against the sift, and felt the ticks with her thumb. Thin, thin, thick, thin, a dot near the rim. 30, then 5, uphill, she said, the words shaking but the math solid. "From the twisted cedar." Dusty had it already. He coursed along the windbreak, nose barely above snow, then braced so hard his whole body became a pointer aimed at a willow stump, soldered into a berm of ice. Willa slogged to it, counting steady. Eli broke the crust with the shovel edge where she planted the pencil nub. The top skin shattered like spun sugar. Underneath, the ground was wrong for late winter, soft, damp, giving back the wet metal tang again, a sulfur ghost that rode the cold. "Slow," Eli told his own hands. He shaved, and prayed, shaving and praying, until the shovel lip found iron and skated. He widened, eased, and the corner came up like a lid of night. Smaller than the coffin-long box by the wolf cairn, stronger iron, truer edges, a sideways latch just where Kincaid had said Pike liked to hide them. Eli levered leather under the catch and lifted. The lid let go with a wet sigh. Something like warmth breathed out, a lie gold tells. Coins lay under the lid, shoulder to shoulder, dulled to honey, some bright as spilled sun. Their thick edges made a soft, tight music. Under them, a bed of vein ore, milky quartz knit with hairline yellow, flecked with fool's gold that winked anyhow. Willa's mitten hovered, Dusty's breath smoked over the trove and fell away. Eli scooped what a pocket could hold. No more. He slid a small oiled packet out of the corner, heavy as a promise, and set it back. "We take winter," he soon sent, mostly to the part of him that wanted spring and summer too. He pressed the lid down to where soil could kiss it shut again. The ice answered him. A long-drawn rip started under his boot and ran like silk tearing, clean and mean. The shelf over the wash cracked a mouth. Snow dropped its jaw. Willa's feet went out from under her. She slid toward the new black with both hands clawing at air. Eli didn't think. He never has at such times. He threw himself flat and reached. His glove found her parka and then nothing. Cloth sliding under wet ice his fingers couldn't trust. He dug the other hand in like a hook and pulled. The edge bit his forearm to the bone. For a heartbeat they hung, girl and man, and the weight of every coin they'd seen pulling the wrong way. The mule screamed once. Dusty hit Willa's shoulder with both paws and scrabbled. Eli hauled. They came up in a tangle and a spill of slush. Something thumped his hip and slid away. One of the small cloth pouches they'd taken. It bumped once in the black and then went under without a sound a man could keep. Willa stared at the hole, eyes big and blue-white with cold. Eli got her face between his hands so she had no choice but to look at him tall. "Gold don't hold heat, girl," he said. The words hardened so they'd stick. "You do." Her mouth worked. She nodded, small and fierce, and tucked the peso down inside her shirt like a heart. The wind leaned in harder, then backed off a hair, as if even the storm had to breathe. In that held second, the country drew a quieter voice. The ice below them groaned, long and low, a string drawn across a big belly. Dusty, shaking so hard his tags clicked, licked Willa's knuckles until her fingers moved again. "See there," she whispered, pointing into the black seam the crack had opened. Eli followed her finger. Under the crazed ice, the washbed showed a pale rib running crosswise to the current, a seam of quartz, milky and stubborn, aiming down country toward South Fork, like a buried road. It wasn't just boxes, it was the vein itself, stitched through the land. Patches slid back out of the white like a thought you weren't proud of. "Trap's set," he said, tasting blood and tobacco. "Shelf will hold a careful horse. Give it a frightened one and he'll write his own letter to the creek." Eli pushed snow into the fresh hole with his forearm and kicked a crust over it, leaving the place looking like bad weather had pawed it, not men. He glanced once toward the wolf cairn. The storm's veil tore just enough to show shapes and then closed again. Shot cracked, one then two, in a slow cadence meant to say, "I'm still here," to men who knew the grammar. "Leave the next cache," he said, already lifting Willa into the wagon. "Vein runs where we're going." "Winter's all we aim to buy ledgers squarin'," Patches said, beard gone white with rime. He slung himself onto the backboard like a sack that had learned to hold on. "Stoves due east, don't look left." They didn't. Eli set the reins and gave the mule his voice. The wagon bumped into the byway, Cedar on one side, Willow on the other, the storm shouldering them along like a hard-handed uncle. Behind, down in the wash, men bawled that you couldn't hear as words, only as a kind of hunger. Somewhere beyond that, Kincaid's pistol spoke again, low and patient, counting time a different way. Willa tucked her hands under her thighs to warm them, and leaned her cheek into Dusty's wet neck. The peso lay hot against her sternum, where breath could bless it or curse it. The ice groaned behind and then went quiet. Up ahead, the wind eased just enough for the air to taste like wood smoke you couldn't see yet. "Time to be scarce," Eli said, and this time none of them had breath to answer. Silas rode the contour above the wolf cairn until the wind trimmed him down to bone and will. The white came in sheets, then in rips, then in little knives that found the seam at his galere. He slid off the black horse behind a spill of basalt and let the reins hang. The animal put its head down and made itself small. Silas thumbed the back strap on his pistol and breathed through wool that tasted like brass. They came in a ragged chevron, 5 dark scarves, 5 mounts blowing steam hard enough to look like brush fires. The lead man sat tall with his sash wrapped twice, proud of the wrong thing. They slowed at the cairn the way wolves do at a fence, testing for wire. "Afternoon, boys," Silas said, loud enough to carry but not to brag. Wind stole the tail off the words. He leaned, showed them a slick angle of coat, and let the first shot go, not at a man, but at the ice rim where Patches had scored it thin. The report crawled along the shelf and came back mean. The lead horse stamped, ears sawing, then took the step its rider asked for. 2 steps wrong and the world did arithmetic. The ice under the front shoes cracked a smile and dropped. The gelding went to its knees, scrabbling, forelegs swallowed to the shoulder. The rider pitched forward, lost the seat, and clawed at air that didn't have a handle. He came up sputtering curses, wet to the waist, alive but thinking about other careers. The second sash flinched wide to skirt the hole and hit the patch Patches had slicked with a melted and frozen skin. His pony's hind feet skated out. The animal windmilled like a dancer that forgot the step and sat down hard, blowing. The man's pistol popped a wild shot that took a flake off the rock by Silas's ear. Silas fired once more, measured. A saddle horn blew splinters. The rider behind it folded instinctively and stayed down, deciding to be smaller than his trouble. "Don't make me fix you," Silas called, flat. "I'm done fixin'." A bullet clipped stone and stung his cheek with grit. Another slapped his coat sleeve and burned like a wasp. He shifted, slow and left-handed, feeding himself to the wind in ragged bites, so no man could hold him in the sights long. He could feel the old deputy living in his bones the way an old brake lives in weather. Count shots, count breaths, count the seconds men forget their training because ice is talking under their feet. "Where's Pike's ledger?" the tall one shouted, voice muffled in wool. "Buried with the man who kept it," Silas said. "Walk out of here and you can dig till spring. Ride in and the shelf will choose for you." He heard them confer in the language of throat clears and saddle creaks. The tall one swore soft. Pride weighs a man down. He put heels to his horse anyway. Silas lifted the colt and took the shot he did not want. Low into the snow just ahead of Iron. The horse checked herself out of good sense. The rider cursed himself for having less. He yanked her hard, wrong, and she skated 3 inches toward the cut mouth of the ice. Silas's shoulder went hot and wet. He didn't feel the impact so much as the tug. Bullet finding meat, glancing the curve of him and leaving heat behind. He breathed once through the hurt and let the air freeze the edges of it. "Square it here," he told the wind, and then the men, and then a name he hadn't said in years. Shots answered, thin in the white. He saw his horse's ears flick and go still. He slid to a new notch where the basalt opened a fist-sized window onto the shelf. He put a round into a scarf's knot just to ruin a man's comfort. He put another into a rider's stirrup so the leather jumped like a snake. He did not shoot to kill if he could help it. Killing makes a longer ledger. The storm breathed in and out. Between breaths he heard Eli's wagon somewhere above the cedars. Wood complaining, harness bells, a tired chime. Good. The plan made its little ticking noises, running like a watch you had to shake now and again. "Pull off," one of the sash yelled, less certain. "He's pegged us." "Peg this," the tall one spat back, but the edge had gone out of him. Chime. He looked at the ragged oval where the river wanted men to be mistakes, and did the math a different way this time. He saw his fellow soaked to the belt, and remembered how cold gold gets. Silas leaned into the rock until it, and he gave each other heat. His sleeve stuck to the coat where blood had glued wool to wool. He kept the colt steady and his breathing slower than the storm. "You go on home," he said, not loud. "Tell whoever owns your scarf the ledger's closing. Tell him to bring a marshal next time and a book." The tall one lifted his chin like pride might keep his ears warm. "You ain't the law." "No," Silas said, "but I remember it." The second's horse, the one that sat down hard, found its legs and wobbled. That was enough to push the decision over. Men who ride for money ride for the next day, same as anyone. They began to back their horses one step at a time, heels gentle, eyes on the shelf, mouths chewing words they didn't say. The soaked one cursed softer now, teeth knocking. Silas let them have the space. He didn't chase. Pride kills the same as ice. He held the aim until the white thinned them to smudges, then to rumor. He listened hard, counting heartbeats until the only sound left was wind grinding spindrift against stone and the far, faint bell note of a harness that might only be memory. He eased down finally, and the ground tilted in a way it hadn't a minute before. He put the colt back in leather by feel and pressed his palm to his own blood to keep it where it was. He looked once at the wolf cairn, stones stacked true by a man who liked clean numbers, and tipped his hat to the absence he still called Pike. "Ledger's square," he told the cairn, "or square enough today." The storm took the words and filed them under, maybe. Silas gathered the black's reins, put his boot in the stirrup, and saw the world go narrow for a blink. He rode anyway, angling into the rocks and the juniper, leaving only a dark smear of blood on snow that the wind started to erase before it finished freezing. Then the weather shut again, fast and complete, and the country went quiet in that heavy ways that makes a man think of church or graves. They came out of the cedars with the storm still hissing at their backs, and the wash lying ahead like a dull blade. The mule balked at the first step onto the ice, and then decided trust was cheaper than arguing in that wind. The wagon's iron tires squealed a protest and took the weight. "Keep her straight," Patches called from the tailboard. He had both hands in the ropes and his hat shoved down until the brim was mostly weather. "A little sideways and she'll write you a letter you won't like." Eli lined the wagon with the faint ridge where snow had drifted thinner, a paler ribbon that might have been Luck or Pike's long hand still on the country. The ice bellied and boomed under them, big, deep notes that rolled along the shelf and came back from somewhere dark. Willa swallowed and sat, heels together, hands inside her sleeves, the peso warm against her ribs. Dusty planted himself braced and watchful, paws spread like a sailor reading a deck. Halfway across, Eli eased out a small canvas poke. He didn't open it, he didn't need the shine. He set it on the seat between his knees, felt the wrong kind of gravity in it, then snapped his wrist and pitched the sack onto a tongue of wind-shaved ice down the wash. It slid like a rabbit ahead of hounds, bumping over small ridges, leaving a faint runnel of scuffed frost that any hungry eye would follow. "Decoy," he said, mostly so his own ears heard the word, and stopped fretting about it. Patches chuckled low. "Boys in sashes love a trail with manners." A gust shoulder checked them, and the wagon slewed a hand's width. The mule leaned, smart as a sermon. The shelf complained, a long string sound, then settled. Eli breathed out slow to keep his hands from telling on him. The far bank rose, a low cut of sand frozen into combs, with rabbit tracks scribbled along it. Cedar tops showed beyond, their green gone black in the white. They made the lip and the wheels grab dirt again, soft and slick. Eli kissed the mule with his tongue and felt the animal give him everything left. A windbreak of stacked rocks and stunted willow took the brunt of the gale, and then, so sudden it felt wrong, the air changed. It smelled of wood smoke, you could finally see, and mutton fat gone sweet, with long simmering. It smelled like a room with a door that shut. Ma Hargrove's station squatted in the lee of a bluff, chinked tight, a stovepipe coughing steady, a battered sign hung on a rawhide hinge. "Eats," burned with a nail. The single window bled lamp yellow into the storm. Eli rolled the wagon into the yard, where bare ground showed where feet had walked often. He climbed down and found his legs had turned to borrowed lumber. Before he could knock, the door unlatched and Ma filled it. Apron griddle burns on her arms, hair pinned with something that did not much care about symmetry. "Get in or freeze where you stand," she said, which was Ma's way of saying welcome. "Leave the dog till I see his manners." Dusty sat with his chest up and ears tidy. Ma eyed him, then stepped aside. "He eats last," she told him. He looked like he understood. Heat hit them like an old friend. The room was small enough to make the stove boss. A kettle sung a tired note. A pot of beans shouldered and hushed and shouldered again. A small roast hid under onions, and the whole place smelled like a promise kept. Willa's eyes went heavy the second she crossed the threshold. Ma pointed at a bench by the stove. "Boots off. Socks steam by the leg. Girl drinks first." Willa did as told, and the steam lifted off her stockings in small ghosts. Dusty slid under the bench and folded himself, head on her foot like a stone with ears. Eli took the bowl Ma shoved into his hands. Beans, fat back, a strip of onion that bit in a way that proved he was still alive, for Patches found a place by the door jamb that seemed to know his shape already. He peeled a glove and blew on split knuckles that looked like dry riverbeds. "Storms mean," Ma said, ladling without pity. "Mean brings company. I seen a knot of riders cuttin' signs smart. Some wore black at the throat. I banged a pan at 'em just to set the tone." "Much obliged," Eli said, and meant 3 more things he didn't say. She set another bowl down, then reached into the apron's divided pocket and brought out a tobacco-stained postcard. The corners had been softened by thumbs longer than hers. A name marched across in an old, careful hand. "Orrin Pike, South Fork." On the back, a quick pencil sketch of ridgelines and a hash of squares that could have been a man's way of making a vein into language. "Been on my shelf 3 weeks," Ma said. "Ryder left it askin' if a Carter family come through to pin it to him. Couldn't say what made him think you would. He had a drawl you'd scrape off your boots and a coat that carried other men's smoke. Left me $50 and a look that didn't fit his face." Kincaid, Eli thought, and felt a pin behind his breastbone loosen a notch. He turned the card over and let his eyes wear the lines for a breath, then set it down like a glass full to the brim. Ma wasn't done. She reached under the counter and laid a creased circular on the table where the soup had sweated rings long ago. U.S. Marshal, inquiry, gold transactions, absent assayer's ledger, parties of interest to be held for questioning. The rest was names he didn't know and towns he did, and it read like the weather for men who forgot there was more than winter and want. Patches sniffed at the circular and spat neatly into the ash scuttle. "Told you," he said. "Book or bunk." Eli's palm found Willa's hair and rested there, weightless as a field mouse. "We'll square it," he said. "We'll sell slow and proper. We aim for pasture with a live creek, not a palace with locks." "Always were more sense in you than in your luck," Ma said, which was Ma's way of calling a man decent. Willa had already faded, her head slipping sideways to find Dusty's back. The dog watched the door while pretending to sleep. Heat pulled the ache out of Eli's fingers, one joint at a time. He didn't see himself move, but suddenly he was setting something on Ma's shelf above the stove, one of Pike's guiding pesos, cleaned only by travel. He set it on edge so the wolf could look across the room, at the door. Ma said nothing, which was also a kind of blessing. The wind rattled the single pane and then thought better of arguing with a woman who had lived through worse. Silence eased in, the thick, good kind that carries spoon clicks and stove talk and a child's slow breath. Eli finished the bowl and set it under the bench for Dusty to lick when approved. "Got one more thing," Ma said after a time, like she'd forgotten, and then remembered because forgetting wasn't her habit. She opened a drawer and laid a half-a-tin badge on the table. The edge was sheared rough where it had once been whole. Dried rust brown clung to the split like a shadow. The star's points were blunted from too much coat, not enough pride. "Found it on the sill after I banged that pan," she said. "Could be fell there long ago, could be left. Looked like a man who remembers his oaths, dropped it when he remembered something else." Eli didn't touch it yet. He didn't say Kincaid's name. The badge looked like a story that had almost made it, but had to break in half to fit through a door. He reached out finally and brought it to the postcard and set them together. Two halves of a country breathing hard. "Ledger's square enough for tonight," Patches said, voice going soft as the steam off Willa's socks. "We'll let morning count the rest." Ma pinched out the lamp by the window until it burned lower and kinder. The stove held their weather. Outside, the storm tired itself into a drift against the door. Inside, plates settled, wood ticked. A mule blew in the shed like a bassoon with hay in it. Eli leaned back against the wall and let sleep come the way the thaw comes. Slow, certain, with something bright running under ice you don't see until it shows. Morning came, the way good coffee does. Slow, dark first, then honest. The stove held the room to human, and Ma let it. Eli woke to the sound of wood ticking as it changed its mind about being a tree. Willa was a warm knot under a blanket patched from men's shirts. Dusty had made himself a door-stopper with ears, one eye open for duty. Patches snored like a saw that needed setting. Eli slid from the bench, careful not to jar anyone's luck, and set the deed on the table. Beside it, he laid out what last night had felt like salvation, and today needed to feel like enough. 2 small cloth pokes of coin, a palm's worth of loose gold stacked into squat towers, 3 silver dollars he couldn't remember keeping back, and a single oiled packet he'd chosen not to open. He counted in tens you could put on a scale. He made small piles, then smaller, until the picture on the rough table said pasture with a live creek and wire enough for a fence and boots that fit a growing foot. Ma poured him black coffee that had lived a second life on the stove. "You done?" she asked without looking, which meant she knew when a man was ready to be asked. "Done." He touched one stack with a finger and let it be. "We sell slow." Ledgered. "A poke now, a poke when the frost quits." "No flashy flash draws flies," Ma said. She dipped bread heel in drippings and slid it to him, then to the dog in that order. "A sire in Buffalo writes clean. He don't talk for free." Patches blinked himself awake and sat up like a man surprised to have managed it again. "Pinkertons love a man who sells all at once," he rasped. "Spreadsheets their hearts right out." Willa stirred, hair in her eyes, the peso on a thong against her throat where she'd strung it in her sleep. She rubbed the coin with her thumb, then remembered and slipped it back under her shirt, like a secret you keep even from morning. "We going home?" she asked around a yawn. "We're going to make one," Eli said. He rapped the table once with his knuckles to seal it. Creek, pasture. Windbreak, room for a stove with a mean streak, like Ma's a draft, shivered under the door. Ma went to kick the drift back, and something thin and charred lifted with it, stuck to the sill by ice. She pried it loose and brought it between 2 fingers like a dead moth. "Looks like the storm wrote you a note," she said. It was a scorched scrap, edges curled, letters pushed hard by a hand that had bled once and learned from it. Eli turned it to the light by the window. 4 words and a mark. Ledger's Square, head, South Fork. S. He felt something behind his ribs, step down out of the saddle, and stand. He saw again the half badge on the table, the postcard with Pike's name, the way the storm had left a lane just wide enough for a wagon. He folded the scrap along its crease and set it under the deed, not above it. "He's alive," Willa breathed as if the stove heat had said so. "Alive's a stretch men keep for when they need it," Patches said. But he didn't sour it. He squinted at the postcard's pencil squiggles. "That quartz rib you saw under the ice runs the way this hand says it does, girl. South Fork'll be talking rock all the way down come thaw." Eli looked at the peso's wolf where he'd propped it last night, eye on the door. He touched it once and turned it just a hair, so the nose faced the window instead. "We ain't chasing a vein," he said, quiet. "We're buying a roof. The rest can run without us." Ma nodded once, the way a fence post might if it approved where you said it. She slid the marshal's circular back under the flour tin. "You bring your paper to the assier when you sell," she said, "and you tell him Ma's stove burned your beans, and he'll knock off a penny." Which meant she'd already sent word to a man who wrote things down for a living. They ate slow, as if the room had years to spend. After, Eli wrapped the coin stacks in old ledger paper Ma had tore from a blank tale of some long-ago tally. He tied them with butcher's string like small, honest parcels. He set one aside and pushed it across to Ma. "For the heat we borrowed," he said, "and for bangin' that pan. You'll pay me by stoppin' in with news when the grass goes tall," Ma said, and put the parcel back on his side. "I like my customers not dead." Willa climbed onto her knees at the window and breathed a clear circle into the frost. Outside, the sky had found two colors again. The drift slumped against the door like it was tired of being tall. Beyond the yard, the low ridge shouldered into daylight. Along one face of it a pale line caught, a seam of quartz iced to honey by the weak sun. She lifted a hand and traced it in the air, the same shape as the postcard's hash, the same direction the scorched scrap had named. "It matches," she said. Like a map and a road. Walking together, Eli stood behind her and put a hand on her shoulder, his palm warm through the rough wool. "Good to know," he said, and left it there. He looked over at the deed, the note, the half-badge, the peso on Ma's shelf, and the careful little parcels bound up for town. True wealth isn't things shit you can drop through ice. It's names that don't sour in another man's mouth. Roofs that hold weather, kids that sleep heavy after eating. Patches rose and worked his leg until it remembered being useful. "I can see you to the first turn," he said. "After that, the road remembers you, or it don't." Eli gathered the deed, slid the scorched scrap between it and the circular like a man making a sandwich of law and luck, and tucked the lot inside his coat. He left the guiding peso where it sat on Ma's shelf, the wolf now watching the morning instead of the door. "Ledger's square enough," he said. "Till supper time anyhow," Ma answered. Outside, the mules stamped, ready to pull toward whatever counted as spring. The stove breathed steady behind them. On the table, Pike's postcard waited without hurrying anyone. And out the window, the quartz seam held its quiet line down toward South Fork, the country's handwriting still legible under winter. They left when the sky found its blue again, thin as glaze. Ma pressed a heel of bread and a strip of cold mutton into Willa's hands and told the dog he could lick the pot if he behaved in the next life. Patches walked them to the first turn, his limp keeping time, then lifted 2 fingers and let the road take back its own. Eli dropped from the wagon at the fence and went to the corner post where frost never seemed to hold. He took a peso from his pocket, not Pike's guide on Ma's shelf, but another he'd kept for the weight of it, and set it upright in a slice of earth. He pried with his knife. He tamped snow over with his heel, so only the ground would know. "Marker," he said. "For what?" Willa asked. "Thank you a man can't spend wrong," he said. He pointed at the shelf inside the window, where a wolf's head would keep watching the room. They rolled into Buffalo slow, not to be seen, but to be written down. The assayer's stove burned hot enough to singe thought. Scales sat fat and smug. The man behind them wore his hair combed into an argument with gravity, and his pencil like a dagger. Eli set a single poke on the counter and kept his voice even. "Ledgered sale," he said. "Name's Carter." Small weight. The assayer trickled gold like dry corn. his face blanking the way gamblers practice. He nodded once when the scale's tongue found truth. He wrote Eli Carter into a book that smelled of ink and old dust. He stamped a receipt that thunked honest and slid a small stack of banknotes across, careful as men are with things that make other men foolish. "Book says it's yours," he said. "Book says you came by it right." Outside, the marshal's circular flapped and whispered to itself. Eli slid the receipt in with the deed and the scorched scrap and felt the packet sit square against his ribs. Names had a way of tasting better when someone else spelled them properly. They didn't linger. The mule's ears found the road out. South of town, a ranch sign leaned into the wind. "Pasture to let, with creek." Cottonwood stood in a thin line, like ribs under a shirt. The creek kept a narrow mouth open where it turned and talked over a gravel bar, a sound that made a man's shoulders drop without his permission. Grass lay brown and tight now, but it lay. The north wind hit the cutbank and went over their heads instead of through them. Eli stepped down, walked the bank, squatted, and let his hand in the water up to the wrist. It bit, and then numbed, and then told him it would run tomorrow and the next day. He stood and looked with the part of his eyes that measured rooms you hadn't built yet. Wire here, stove there, pen downwind, a lean-to for the mule while we argue about barns. Garden, Willa said. Garden where the sun don't lose its nerve before supper. She took the peso from under her shirt and worked it between her fingers, then tucked it back. "Coin rules, Papa," she said, as if testing him. He smiled at that, small and warmed from inside. "Thin ticks 5, thick's 10, dot means count uphill when the ground wants to lie. But there's another set." He knelt to her height, his breath showing. "Count right, don't cheat yourself. Pull right, don't take more than you can carry without dropping your kid. Stop right, know when winter's over and luck turns back into work." Dusty sneezed in agreement and pawed the frozen grass like he'd already picked out a front step. A garter of light slipped between two clouds and laid itself along the far slope. The quartz seam caught it, pale line iced to honey, stitching the hill to the day. It ran the way Pike's hand had sketched, the way Willa had seen under the ice, the way the scorched scrapums had said. It ran without their help or their blessing. "We ain't chasing," Eli said, "not to kill the gleam, but to set it in its place." "We ain't," Willa echoed, though her eyes honored the shine for a heartbeat longer, the way you honor a song you don't have to sing. They traded the assayer's paper for a handshake on the pasture and a promise to bring wire when the road would stand for it. The widow who kept the deed box looked them over like a woman who'd counted winters and found each one heavier than the last. She took the notes and wrote the name Carter on a narrow slip, and her pen made a sound like a fence staple set full. By the time they turned the wagon toward the rise that would be theirs, the day had gone to that clear, cold place between afternoon and evening where sound carries and edges cut clean. Eli stepped off once more at Ma's fence on the way back through, knocked snow off his heel, and looked at the corner where he'd set the peso. Nothing showed. That was the point. At the station he left a note folded small under the half badge. "If a man with the other half comes looking, feed him. See." Ma didn't read it aloud. She didn't need to. She slid the badge under the postcard and let both lean on the flour tin like kin at a wake. They camped that night on their own dirt, if not yet their own house. Wagon backed into Cottonwood Creek talking beside them. Stars swung out cold and loud. Willa slept with her feet toward the fire and her head on Dusty's ribs. The dog watched the dark in long blinks. Eli held one of the banknotes up to the firelight and then put it away because paper burns fast. "You hear it?" he asked, not sure if he meant the creek or the country or the part of himself that finally quit grinding its teeth. Willa listened and nodded into her blanket. "It sounds like a stove that won't quit," she said. Eli lay back and watched frost find the wagon spokes and the breath off the mule. Somewhere to the north, a man with half a badge might be riding a slow horse along a ridge that remembered him. The quartz seam would keep its line with or without witnesses. The ledger would open again tomorrow. It always does. He reached across the blankets, found Willa's mittened hand, and closed his around it till both of them felt warmer than either alone. "We live by each other, not by gold," he said, the words fitting in the mouth like bread. "Gold doesn't keep you warm," she answered. "Not asleep yet, not all the way awake, a child at the hinge between." The fire settled, the creek talked on, above them the stars sent their cold counsel, and under them the ground. This small piece of Wyoming they could call theirs without choking, held like a good promise. The wind came and went, but it didn't own the place anymore, not tonight, not to them. When the wind dies and the creek keeps talking, that's enough. If this tale rode well with you, drop 0 if you'd choose the creek, 1 if you'd chase the vein. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next trail we ride. More cold nights, hard choices, and a little warmth saved for the end.